Welcome to my bedtime breathers. These are a series of short stories, of which there are 6 in a book. And my first book, called Bedtime Breathers Book 1, contains 6 short stories. I wrote these songs under my pseudonym, Doug Ross. If you think that you're brave enough, then stay and listen, because it's free. But don't blame me if you're frightened. Read on. This symbol is just to let you know that the stories are horror, thriller, suspense, and so on. End of part 1. Hi. It's me again, Bruce Grant. I'm now going to give you book number 1, story number 2, part 2, Maggot, from where we left off. And I'll read the last sentence that I had where we left off last time. However, he always seemed to come up top of the class in terms of academic marks in each of their subjects. Ma, noun, informal, a shortening of the international word mama, one's mother, as a name. Judah's mother, Margot, he always used Ma, never ceased in making derisive comments and criticizing her unusual son. She was convinced that he had heard every word that she used during her tirades and invectives. She not only believed that, but opined that he was actually listening to her ravings. Ma was forever hoping that she would see those changes, for which she longed to see in him. She wanted him to become a completely normal child and grow up to be a normal man who would marry a local girl and have a simple life that she herself led and could also control. She completely misunderstood what her son was trying to accomplish. And the more that she harangued him, the more he became determined in his efforts to follow his ideas and reach his goals, of which she had no inkling at all. Judas had absolutely no intentions of relinquishing his goals and following his mother's desires and wishes, or rather directives and dictates, which in his mind would lead him to his father's demise. Judas wanted a longer and fulfilled life. Judas actually believed that his father, Bobby, wanted to get a better life for his son, and for Judas not to follow in his own footsteps. Margot had no intentions, it seemed, of letting Judas loose and choose his own direction in life, but was very determined to control them and produce an offspring in the image of her husband, a weak and absolutely controllable individual, subject to her whims, he without offering any arguments or differences of opinion at all. She had another thing coming. Ma never once relented in her dogmatic mannerisms and pushed for all she was worth to try to better Judas for her own, try to better Judas for her own advantages. She failed to completely understand that Judas was somewhat more intelligent than his father had been, and definitely more intelligent than his mother. She was absolutely oblivious to the fact that her son was, in actual fact, a bright star. Judas excelled in the sciences in his schoolwork because the subjects were very close to his heart, and he had his plans that he was hoping to fulfill made years in advance. He would complete them. At that, he was convinced. He always looked forward with extreme eagerness to his classes in biology, whereby he never failed in managing to persuade the attendant teacher to allow him to digress from the typical class syllabus in order to follow his own experimentations with living organisms. His marks in the subject of biology were always A+ or A++. This meant that he was head of the class and a somewhat respected pupil, with most of those teachers regarding him with something like a little awe. His mother never had any interest in his academic successes. Consequently, he never had his school reports viewed or read by his mother. She was completely ignorant of the successes and the direction that her unusual son was heading. Judas continued his rapid learning throughout his school years, followed with an intermediate acceptance by the local... let me reread that. Let's start the paragraph again. Pause. Judas continued his rapid learning throughout his school years, followed with an immediate acceptance by the local university enrollment board, securing him on an elevated and unique special course in biology, dealing with that of insects. The correct name is entomology. Because of his successes during his school years, Judas was offered a scholarship, which negated any need to pay for any tuition or materials for the course in the university. This way, he was able to attend university without any interruption or claim on the use of income for the family that Ma was earning. As a result, she had no ammunition to use against him with respect to his consumption of increasingly more funds, yet without adding to the family income, nor requiring any of the family funds for his education. The university required nothing at all from him except his undying dedication, that of completing his science course at the end of 5 years with a doctorate. His mother continued her unending diatribe of vitriol with respect to her dealing with her highly unusual son, and made sure that Judas heard and understood every word she uttered. She was absolutely adamant in her desire to cause him to fail in life, so that she would be in a position to control him, just as she had controlled his father before him. He ignored her tirades, as he had done for quite a few years, and continued on his quest to complete his learning by the time he would finish his university course. His success at university had been extolled by many of the lecturers who were touting him as an incredibly marvelous student, sucking out the very deepest amount of information dealing with his particular discipline. In fact, his own professor was slightly worried that he would not be able to impart to Judas anything more, as this young man was fast becoming as well informed as the professor and was looking for additional external information that would add to the finite volumes which the university had in its enormous libraries and reference books. Eventually the day came when he had completed his entomological course with flying colours. His professor was immensely proud of his student because it also gave him brownie points with respect to his position in the university. The typical procedures that students were required to follow for the graduation ceremonies had been discussed a few days prior to the actual event. Because of the nature and peculiarity of Judas's course, along with the highest quality of the work that the young student had succeeded in completing, the university was giving its highest ever honor award to Judas. The university board itself was so impressed with his progress and his final examination results that they decided to purchase his graduation garb as a final gift for the student. Part of the reasoning was simply because the status of the university within the country had improved dramatically because of this particular student. They felt that he should be rewarded for that as well. The decision was made that he would have a gown, a very light grey, embroidered with a dark ivory ribbon, approximately ½ an inch wide. A mortarboard with a dark ivory tassel, also embroidered with dark ivory ribbon. Judith's graduation had been the highest ever level for an honours degree first class, presented within the university. And as a result, the board decided that the hood of the gown was to be embroidered with a very valuable ermine fur, but of its winter colouring, white. Naturally, this and assuming young man was quite embarrassed. That's another error. Oh boy. Naturally, this assuming young man was quite embarrassed by the gift offered by the university board, but graciously accepted and downed the gown. I'll have to reread this all again. Naturally, this assuming young man was quite embarrassed by the gift offered by the university board, but graciously accepted and donned the gown. The official photographer fussed around, making sure that he had ample numbers of well-focused photographs of the university's latest prodigy. He was asked whether or not he would like a position with the university, to which he responded that for a couple of years he would rather enjoy that, particularly if he was able to continue with his own researches into the work that he wanted to complete to his own satisfaction. The value of this position provided him with money for himself, from which he could pay rent to his mother and additional funds for food, although he preferred to eat in the cafes in the town and also the university canteens. The students' canteen had a very varied menu with extremely moderate prices, enabling him to eat good quality meals at very much reduced or subsidized prices. Judas started enjoying his life more than he had for the previous 10 years. One of the main reasons for this increased enjoyment was that he began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It was 22 months and 3 days after his graduation that he realized his goal. He was ecstatic. He knew now exactly what he was able to do and to accomplish it with a minimum amount of difficulty and/or trouble. In order to bring this about, he decided that he would return to his home each day and also ate the complete meals, which were nowhere near as wholesome as his university cuisine had been. Nonetheless, it provided him with the environment he required in order to fulfill his dreams. Once again, dealing with the maggots that he had been scrutinizing for the last number of years and analyzing their makeup right down to the DNA level, he prepared his first concoction. He had barely finished his preparation when his mother yelled at him that it was time for him to come in and eat and not to be late, to make sure that he took off his shoes and washed his hands. He did this with a smile on his face, carrying the tiny vial in his pocket, which he would use fairly shortly. The evening meal was going to be a cabbage soup with an unappetizing ball of meat barely floating on its surface. The soup had an almost oleaginous characteristic that suited Judas right down to the ground. Whilst his mother turned round to do something at the sink, Judas poured the contents of the vial into her plate, covering her piece of meat, which was substantially larger than Judas' piece. His preparation or concoction had no flavour, nor had it any colour, so was invisible to the consumer. She turned back towards the table, yanked out her chair, dropped onto it, all the time berating and yelling at Judas. She greedily consumed her soup, cutting the meatball in a third and depositing that on the spoon and then into her mouth. Judas smiled. He leaned back with a quiet and yet serene expression on his face. He could do this for days on end, which is what he did. In fact, it only took approximately 9 days for the metamorphosis to complete itself which was remarkable considering the mass of his mother. By the 10th day evening, she was lying on the kitchen floor, pulsing, just as those maggots on bad meat had pulsed. As she deteriorated, she lost the power of reason, so never knew what was happening to her. She had lost the complete use of her voice, which was very pleasing to Judas, who was able to relax without the grating stream of verbal diarrhea, which is how he thought of it, continuously issuing from her oral orifice. He had beaten her without hurting her. All she did then was to live out her very short life, as he had deliberately failed to allow her to pupate. Margot, Ma, was rewarded at last. The end. I've left in mistakes just to show that it's not AI, and I don't like making mistakes, so a couple I'm going to obliterate, but the others, it's me. I'm getting old, even though I wrote the stories. I'll see you later. Look out for the story number 3 in book number 1. And I don't know if I'm going to tell you the name of it just yet. We shall see. I'll tell you the name. I think. No, I won't. I'll leave it as a surprise for you. Bye. See you in a few more days.